Cam Newton made over $100 million, won an NFL MVP, and looks set for a long career after football. But at almost 37, his life has taken a surprising turn, from being fired by ESPN to serious personal challenges. Here's how he's living today. This week's edition of Cam Loses Another Job hits different because of how fast it happened. He didn't get phased out. He didn't get a farewell tour. He got a phone call in the middle of a wave of layoffs that hit ESPN's biggest names all at once, and Cam Newton was one of them. ESPN has officially fired the former NFL MVP Cam Newton as part of a swift sweep of network cuts, hitting both on-air talent and digital production staff. The Cam Newton ESPN layoff is easily one of the most high-profile media pink slips this year, ending his very short-lived tenure as Stephen A. Smith's primary Monday morning debate partner on First Take. This wasn't some rumor floating around. Reports of Newton's release broke on a Tuesday in July 2026, led by Outkick's Bobby Burack, and confirmed shortly after by major sports media outlets. And Newton wasn't cheap to keep around either. Newton was on an estimated $2 million per year contract. That's real money for a guy sitting across from Stephen A. Smith a couple mornings a week. But when the corporate scalpel came out, that salary made him a target instead of a protected asset. Here's the thing that makes this sting even more. Newton wasn't some rookie hire nobody expected to stick around. Newton began his ESPN career in October 2024 as a periodic guest on the First Take show with Stephen A. Smith. And after a year, the former Carolina Panthers QB signed a multi-year extension. To obtain a more solidified role on the show, he climbed. He got the bigger contract. He got the bigger chair. Newton was elevated into the premier spot after Shannon Sharpe parted ways with ESPN the year before. And then right before he was set to actually start that third season in the role, the door closed. He wasn't alone walking out, but that doesn't make it less brutal. Also swept up in the layoffs were Ryan Clark, who was let go during NFL Live, and the legendary Carl Ravech, along with several NFL Network employees, including analyst Charles Davis and reporter Tom Pelissero. Cam's arguably the biggest name to go, but he likely won't be the last as layoffs continue. Now, ESPN wants people to believe this was strictly about numbers on a spreadsheet. Corporate restructuring was the official reason, though high contract costs and behind-the-scenes friction most certainly accelerated the decision, with the main force behind the layoff stemming from Disney's media restructuring. But anyone who followed Newton's last year on the show knows there was more simmering underneath than just budget cuts. Newton had gotten himself into it with the one person whose good graces mattered most to his job security, Stephen A. Smith. Newton's run on the show included a very public spat with Smith after Newton brought Jason Whitlock onto his own podcast, a beef that played out across social media for weeks, and Newton's decision to interview Whitlock and then double down may have contributed to ESPN's decision to fire him. So when the axe fell, it wasn't a total shock to people who've been watching the drama build. It was, however, a shock to Newton himself, at least according to what he told his own audience. Former NFL MVP Cam Newton was among the biggest names impacted by the mass ESPN layoffs this week. And in the days after, he had to sit in front of a microphone and explain to his own fans, on his own terms, what it felt like to be let go by the very network he'd staked his post-football identity on. He didn't rage, he didn't lash out. Instead, Newton admitted he was disappointed to be laid off, but raved about the talent at ESPN and said he deeply appreciated his time there, adding that he viewed it like an internship that taught him a lot about content and journalism. He put it plainly on his podcast. It was an internship almost, he said, before praising the production values and talent that made the network what it is. But underneath that graciousness was a warning shot to himself and to anybody else in his position. He told his audience the real lesson of getting fired was about ownership. If you don't own your own platform, you're gonna get overlooked, bypassed, and be extinct just like dinosaurs, he said. That's a man trying to convince himself and everyone watching that this loss isn't really a loss, that he saw it coming and built a backup plan. He tried to sound unbothered about the whole thing when he addressed it directly, saying of himself and his fellow cast-off Ryan Clark, "It's unfortunate what happened to Ryan Clark, but what I will tell you is this, Ryan Clark gonna be okay. The pivot ain't going nowhere. It's unfortunate what happened to me. Some would think, but I'm good. Some would think." That qualifier does a lot of work in that sentence. It's the sound of a guy trying to control how the story gets told about him in real time on his own show, because he knows exactly how this looks from the outside. A three-time Pro Bowler, a former MVP, getting cut loose from a corporate media gig at 37, with no NFL team calling and no obvious next step lined up. It remains unclear what next steps the three-time Pro Bowler will take in his career. That uncertainty is exactly where this story starts to widen out, because the ESPN firing isn't an isolated bad week for Cam Newton. It's the latest chapter in a stretch of years where the man who once seemed untouchable has had to keep explaining over and over why his life doesn't look like people assume it should. To understand why losing a media gig hits this hard, you have to go back to how Newton's football career actually ended, because it didn't end with a parade. It ended quietly, and then it kept trying to unend itself for years after everybody assumed it was over. Since getting drafted #1 overall, 2021 was the first season he wasn't participating. After being a core member of the Panthers and Patriots over an 11-year career, he'd been the #1 pick, the 2015 MVP, the face of a franchise that went to a Super Bowl behind his arm and his legs. Then it all cooled off fast. Over the years before that, Newton had been bouncing around the league, playing in smaller roles and suffering nagging ailments that had taken away his explosive power. He didn't formally retire so much as run out of teams willing to call. After his one-year, $6 million contract with the Carolina Panthers expired in 2021, he officially stepped away from the game. No goodbye tour, no Canton speech, just a contract that ended and phones that stopped ringing the way they used to. For a while, Newton insisted he wasn't finished. The real reason he wasn't playing, despite being healthy, was because he didn't want to be a backup QB. He was still in peak shape and might consider returning. That's a proud athlete talking himself into a comeback that never fully came. Instead, football moved on without him, and Newton had to find something else to be. What he built instead was a media career, and on paper, it looked like a smart pivot. Since his last NFL game in 2021, Cam Newton fully moved into media and content creation. While maintaining close ties to the Carolina Panthers fan base, he didn't just wait around for a network to call him. He built out a large production studio for his own shows in Metro Atlanta and continued to host conversations around football and culture. The podcasts Fourth One and Funky Friday became his identity. The retired signal caller hosts two successful podcasts, Fourth and One and Funky Friday. But even as the podcast empire grew, the money conversation kept following him. Because here's the truth. Nobody wants to say about pro athletes, the number attached to their name doesn't reflect what's actually left in the bank. Newton, who earned over $133 million as an NFL star, isn't completely without work. But isn't completely without work is a strange sentence to have to write about a former league MVP. He addressed this head-on more than once in ways that made a lot of people uncomfortable. In a January 2025 episode of Special Forces, World's Toughest Test, the former Carolina Panthers star admitted that without his NFL paycheck, it has sometimes been hard to feel like Superman for his children, saying, "Being in the NFL, everyone knows there's a large sum of money that comes to you in a short span of time. And being away from the game for 3 years, those checks don't come in the same. Like I got 8 kids." He went further on his own podcast, laying out just how steep that cliff really was. During his prime, Newton said he was clearing over $20 million in a season, roughly $1 million per week when you factored in endorsements. Go from $1 million a week to podcast ad reads and speaking fees. That's not a small adjustment. That's a different life entirely. And he didn't dress it up. "It hurts me knowing that I can't provide like I once did. It hurts thinking that I'm Superman. But in reality, I'm just a man," he said. That line, Superman turning into just a man, is the closest thing to a thesis statement for where Newton's been living these last few years. The financial pressure isn't abstract either, because the family he's providing for is enormous. Cam Newton shares 4 children with his former partner, Kia Proctor, sons Chosen Sebastian, Kamita Swain, and Kashmir Swaint, along with daughter Sovereign Dior Cambella. And he also helped raise Proctor's eldest daughter, Shakira, while also being a father to son Caesar with Lorena Shaw. By the time he made those comments, he was up to 8 kids. The former Panthers QB made these comments while he was the father of 8, before welcoming his 9th child in late 2025. 9 children, multiple mothers, a retired athlete's income. That math doesn't work the way people assume it does when they see a career earnings number in a headline. Even Newton's peers in the league have said the same thing in blunter terms, describing exactly how a huge contract evaporates once agents, taxes, and lifestyle take their cut. Odell Beckham Jr. put it this way on the Pivot podcast. "I've always explained this to people, bro. You give somebody a 5-year, $100 million contract. What is it really? It's 5 years for $60 million. You're getting taxed. Do the math. That's 12 a year that you have to spend, use, save, invest, flaunt, whatever. I'm gonna buy a car. I'm gonna give my mama a house." Newton isn't a cautionary tale in isolation. He's part of a pattern that plenty of retired stars quietly live through. So when people ask how Cam Newton, a guy worth tens of millions, could possibly be struggling, the answer isn't that he's broke. It's that the machine that used to refill his account every single week simply isn't running anymore. And 9 kids and a media career built from scratch don't replace that machine overnight. For 3 years, Cam Newton kept trying to walk back through a door that kept getting narrower. He wasn't just posting workout videos for clout. He genuinely believed and said out loud that he belonged on an NFL roster. He didn't want to be a backup QB. That's the sentence that explains 3 years of near silence from every front office in the league. Teams called about camp arms, about clipboard holder roles, about mentorship gigs. Newton wanted a starting job or nothing. He got nothing. It's a strange kind of purgatory for a guy his caliber, Cam. Newton had more than a decade-long career, mostly with the Carolina Panthers, and after starting his NFL journey in 2011, he was the face of the Panthers until, in 2020, he switched teams and played a season for the New England Patriots. That one Patriots season didn't go how anyone hoped, and it became the beginning of the end rather than a bridge to something new. There was a flicker of hope near the finish line. The Panthers did not lose faith in their former QB and gave him a chance to start a few games, taking him back in after their starting QB, Sam Darnold, sustained a shoulder injury mid-season. Fans wanted the reunion story. They wanted Superman back in Carolina blue one more time. Panthers fans could not wait to see their favorite QB play that season. It didn't work out that way. Newton started in 5 games, but could not lead his side to a single victory. And although his level of performance was at its lowest, he still believed he could outplay any QB in the league, remaining a free agent looking for the right team to sign him up. No win in 5 starts. That's the stat that quietly ended the Cam still got it conversation for most of the league, even as Newton kept insisting otherwise in his own head. While the comeback stalled, Newton filled the silence the only way he could, leaning into content. And it did give him something football couldn't anymore, an audience that was his to keep. He appeared on a lot of podcasts, some of which stirred up controversy and some of which enhanced the aura surrounding his brand, occasionally using the media to demonstrate his in-depth understanding of the QB position. That media path is what eventually led him to ESPN's door in the first place, and it's worth remembering how much he'd sacrificed of his on-field identity to get there. He wasn't just a guest analyst chasing a check. He was building a second act, because the first one had quietly closed on him without ceremony. By the time First Take called, Newton wasn't chasing football anymore. He was chasing relevance in a completely different arena, one built on hot takes, engagement, and staying in the news cycle rather than staying on a 53-man roster. He returned to First Take under a new multi-year deal announced by ESPN in August 2025, contributing regular analysis alongside Stephen A. Smith and other personalities, saying in the announcement, "I'm excited to be back with the First Take team and share my voice on all things sports," with ESPN noting his unique perspective and team-focused approach within the show's weekday lineup. That deal was supposed to be the stability football retirement never gave him. A real seat, a real title, a real contracted multi-year paycheck that didn't depend on a general manager believing in a 37-year-old arm. And for a while it worked, until the Whitlock interview happened, and Newton's second act ran straight into the same kind of turbulence that had defined his first one. Just like his playing career ended with a stretch of instability rather than a clean landing, his media career hit its own version of a 5-game losing streak before the layoff notice ever came. By the time the layoffs hit this July, Newton wasn't a rookie broadcaster feeling his way through a new industry. He was a guy who'd already lived through one identity collapsing once before, and had built a whole second identity specifically, so he'd never have to feel that helpless again. Which makes it worse, not better, that the second identity just took a hit too. If you want to understand why ESPN was so quick to cut Cam Newton loose the moment budget cuts came around, you have to go back to the spring to one podcast episode that never should have blown up the way it did. Newton made a decision that on its face seemed like harmless content, booking a guest for his own show. The former NFL MVP invited ex-ESPN and Fox Sports commentator Jason Whitlock onto his podcast 4th and 1 to discuss their differences. And while the majority of the conversation focused on Whitlock's regressive takes about Newton's fashion and masculinity, Whitlock also saved some time for his favorite enemy in the industry, Stephen A. Smith. That's the moment everything shifted. Whitlock didn't hold back once Newton gave him the floor, reinvigorating a nasty feud that went off the rails the previous spring. Whitlock accused Smith of lying about his background on several fronts, and Newton, the guy sitting across the table, the guy whose entire ESPN career depended on his relationship with Smith, didn't push back. Cam may have tiptoed on the third rail when interviewing Smith's sworn enemy, Jason Whitlock, on Newton's podcast, and during the segment, Whitlock pushed the notion that Smith's memoir contains fabrications. Newton didn't push back. Smith found out, and he did not take it well. He didn't stay quiet about how it felt to watch someone he'd elevated let his enemy take shots at him unchallenged. Smith fumed publicly, asking rhetorically how Whitlock could call him a fraud without facts, saying, "I didn't write my own book. How do you know if you're gonna bring me up and you're somebody that's in my inner circle and you talk to me? Grill them. Don't just let them talk smack." This wasn't just Smith venting into a void. Other people around the show weighed in, and the fallout spread fast through ESPN's whole ecosystem. The interview between Cam Newton and Jason Whitlock created ripples across ESPN, affecting Newton's relationships with colleagues, including fellow First Take contributor Ryan Clark, whose remarks about Smith drew attention and criticism from other ESPN talent, who felt Newton should have challenged some of the comments. Ryan Clark, without even naming Newton directly, made his disapproval clear in a way everyone understood exactly who he meant. Clark wrote, "If someone shows you love, has you on their show twice a week at least. You don't bring his known enemy on your show and allow your guest to talk about person that's not G at all." Newton didn't just sit there and absorb the criticism quietly either. He pushed back on Clark specifically, defending his editorial choices in a way that showed he wasn't willing to be painted as disloyal. According to ESPN colleague Ryan Clark, Newton choosing to have Whitlock on his show put his loyalty into question. Newton's response made clear he saw it differently, insisting that whatever tension existed between him and Smith over the booking wasn't as deep as outsiders assumed. "If you knew the real, you would have known that Stephen A. Smith and I are good," he said. Smith himself, for his part, tried to project calm about Newton's job security in the immediate aftermath, even while making clear the loyalty debt hadn't been forgotten. Smith weighed in with both reassurance and a pointed warning, confirming that Newton's role on First Take was not in immediate danger, but making clear that Newton had been benefiting from loyalty he did not seem to acknowledge. That's a warning shot dressed up as reassurance, and it lines up almost perfectly with what came next. Newton's run on the show included a very public spat with Smith after Newton brought Jason Whitlock onto his own podcast, a beef that played out across social media for weeks. And Newton's decision to interview Whitlock and then double down may have contributed to ESPN's decision to fire him. Think about what that means. When cost-cutting time came around and executives had to decide which of Smith's co-hosts and colleagues were worth protecting, Newton had already spent months burning trust with the one person whose backing might have shielded him. Whoever ESPN puts across from Smith on Mondays this fall inherits a chair that has proven expensive to fill and even harder to keep filled. That's the quiet, uncomfortable truth sitting underneath the corporate restructuring language ESPN put out officially. Budgets matter, but relationships inside a building like that matter just as much when it's time to decide who survives the cuts and who doesn't. So where does that leave Cam Newton right now? At 37, sitting without the NFL paycheck, and now without the ESPN paycheck either. He's not destitute. Nobody watching this should walk away thinking Cam Newton is broke. Endorsements with Under Armour, Gatorade, and Beats by Dre pushed his net worth into the $50-75 million range, and by every reasonable definition, he is financially secure for life. That security is real. What's changed is the shape of his life around it. The comparison he keeps making over and over isn't between rich and poor. It's between two different versions of rich. The version where a check the size of a small business shows up every single week, and the version where you have to actually manage, invest, and stretch what you've already got. He even offered a quote he said has guided him for years. I would rather live the rest of my life comfortably like a prince, rather than to splurge like a king. That's a man trying to reframe a downgrade as a philosophy. And to be fair to him, it's not an unreasonable one. But the frequency with which he keeps returning to this subject on reality shows, on his own podcast, in interviews about layoffs, tells you it's not just a talking point, it's something he's actually wrestling with. Part of what makes it heavier is the sheer number of people depending on him. 9 kids spread across multiple households, all of them still expecting the version of dad who could once write any check without blinking. Newton has kids, including sons Chosen, Cometus, Cashmere, Caesar and Jaden, and daughters Sovereign Dior, Shakira, and more, born across a stretch of nearly a decade. That's not a family structure that shrinks its expenses just because dad's income changed shape. His own words keep circling back to that responsibility and to how much heavier it feels now than it used to. Newton didn't crash. He came down from an altitude most people never reach. And even from that height, the landing still stung. That's about as honest a self-assessment as you're likely to get from a guy who spent over a decade being called Superman by an entire fan base. He's tried to build something durable out of the wreckage of his playing career. The studio in Atlanta, the 2 podcasts, the ESPN chair he fought to get and then lost. Today, his income sources stretch far beyond football. He earns from media work, speaking events, and ownership in private companies, focusing on control rather than speed, building long-term value instead of chasing fast checks. That's the version of Cam Newton trying to convince you, and maybe himself, that this is all part of a plan rather than a series of doors closing one after another. Even the reconciliation with his old team feels like part of that same effort to stabilize something. This past season, he returned to Charlotte in a ceremonial role before the Panthers' wild-card home game, spotlighting a thaw in relations after years of distance from the franchise. A guy trying to rebuild bridges to the one place that made him a star in the first place. Maybe because the newer bridges, the ESPN ones, just collapsed under him. What's next for him now isn't clear, and even the outlets covering the firing admit as much. It remains unclear what next steps the 3-time Pro Bowler will take in his career. He still has the podcast. He still has 4th and 1 and Funky Friday, the platforms he built specifically so that no single network could ever again hold that much power over his livelihood. That instinct, own your own platform, don't be extinct like the dinosaurs, is the lesson he keeps repeating to anyone who'll listen, almost like he's rehearsing it for himself as much as for his audience. Maybe that's the most honest way to describe where Cam Newton is at 37. Not broke, not finished, but repeatedly, publicly, having to explain why the man who once had it all figured out is still figuring it out. One lost job, one lost paycheck, one hard conversation with his own kids at a time. Superman never actually came back. What's left is just a man, still working, still adjusting, still trying to land somewhere that feels like solid ground. Sources: Cam Newton admits he learned a valuable lesson from surprise ESPN firing. Why Cam Newton was fired by ESPN in latest round of on-air layoffs. Why ESPN laid off Cam Newton. Inside the First Take cuts, Cam Newton reacts to his ESPN firing. Panthers legend Cam Newton sends clear message after ESPN firing. Cam Newton reportedly fired by ESPN. Latest big layoff at network. ESPN makes surprise decision to fire Cam Newton. Cam Newton is laid off by ESPN too. What is Cam Newton doing now? Cam Newton's honest admission is a warning every NFL player should hear. Cam Newton gets brutal career update as ESPN layoffs continue. Cam Newton opens up about life after the NFL. Panthers legend Cam Newton says money just don't come in the same. Cam Newton, who made $133 million in NFL, once said he can't provide. Cam Newton shares financial struggles in providing for 8 kids. Cam Newton says it hurts not providing for his 8 kids. Cam Newton stats, Pro Football Reference. Is Cam Newton still playing football? Where is Cam Newton? What is he doing now? Cam Newton responds to backlash over Jason Whitlock interview. Stephen A. Smith and Cam Newton clash over Whitlock interview. Ryan Clark criticizes Cam Newton over Jason Whitlock interview. Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Cam Newton tells Ryan Clark. Stephen A. Smith rips Cam Newton for Jason Whitlock interview. Ryan Clark challenges Cam Newton's loyalty. Stephen A. Smith says Cam Newton's spot on First Take is safe. https://jirvweb.com/Stephen A. Smith Cam Newton First Take Jason Whitlock Cam Newton net worth 2026 https://celebritythere.com